Hello, I'm Michelle, the host of Haunted Moonlight. If you enjoy spooky things like hauntings, aliens, cryptids, witches, rituals, movies, books, listener tales, and so much more, then come take a listen to Haunted Moonlight. New episodes drop every Sunday and are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Audible, and iHeartRadio. Can't wait to keep it spooky with you.
Welcome to the D.E.A.D podcast, where I discuss all things spooky and weird. I'm Desi, and today I'll be talking about the Smiling Man. Let's get started. Hey everyone, how's everyone doing tonight? I hope y'all are doing good tonight. I am not drinking anything tonight. I didn't have anything new to drink, so I just have water. And I am wearing my The Exorcist t-shirt, and it's black and it has like the lime green on it. And so that's the shirt I am wearing tonight. Let's get going. Some of you have already heard of the Smiling Man. Some of you may have even encountered him yourself. His facial expression, which appears frozen, is unnaturally exaggerated, with eyes open wide and mouth drawn into an even wider smile. He moves in a curious, dance-like fashion, similar to the box step performed in a waltz, finishing each box with a large step forward, making his way creepily towards you. He moves quickly and gracefully, more quickly than one would expect. He wears a dark suit. It is old and very much out of style with the current fashion, although appears to be in good condition. It is not known what he is smiling about, or why it is so broad. We may never know. The Smiling Man first surfaced on the web in 2012 by Reddit user Blue Tidal Wave, and this is his story. About 5 years ago, I lived downtown in a major city in the US. I've always been a night person, so I would often find myself bored after my roommate, who was decidedly not a night person, went to sleep. To pass the time, I used to go for long walks and spend the time thinking. I spent 4 years like that, walking alone at night, and never once had a reason to feel afraid. I always used to joke with my roommate that even the drug dealers in the city were polite. But all of that changed in just a few minutes on one evening. It was a Wednesday, somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning, and I was walking near a police-patrolled park quite a ways from my apartment. It was a quiet night, even for a weeknight, with very little traffic and almost no one on foot. The park, as it was most nights, was completely empty. I turned down a short side street in order to loop back to my apartment. When I first noticed him, at the far end of the street, on my side, was a silhouette of a man, dancing. It was a strange dance, similar to a waltz. But he finished each box with an odd forward stride. I guess you could say he was dance walking, headed straight for me. Deciding he was probably drunk, I stepped as close as I could to the road to give him the majority of the sidewalk to pass me by. The closer he got, the more I realized how gracefully he was moving. He was very tall and lanky, and wearing an old suit. He danced closer still, until I could make out his face. His eyes were open wide and wild, head tilted back slightly, looking off at the sky. His mouth was formed into a painfully wide cartoon of a smile. Between the eyes and the smile, I decided to cross the street before he danced any closer. I took my eyes off of him to cross the empty street. As I reached the other side, I glanced back. and then stopped dead in my tracks. He had stopped dancing and was standing with one foot in the street, perfectly parallel to me. He was facing me, but still looking skyward, smile still wide on his lips. I was completely and utterly unnerved by this. I started walking again, but kept my eyes on the man. He didn't move. Once I had put about half a block between us, I turned away from him for a moment to watch the sidewalk in front of me. The street and sidewalk ahead of me were completely empty. Still unnerved, I looked back to where he had been standing to find him gone. For the briefest of moments, I felt relieved until I noticed him. He had crossed the street and was now slightly crouched down. I couldn't tell for sure due to the distance and the shadows, but I was certain he was facing me. I had looked away from him for no more than 10 seconds, so it was clear that he had moved fast. I was so shocked that I stood there for some time, staring at him, and then he started moving toward me again. He took giant, exaggerated, tiptoed steps, as if he were a cartoon character, sneaking up on someone, except he was moving very, very quickly. I'd like to say at this point I ran away, or pulled out my pepper spray, or my cell phone, or anything at all, but I didn't. I just stood there, completely frozen, as the smiling man crept towards me. And then he stopped again, about a car length away from me, still smiling his smile, looking to the sky. When I finally found my voice, I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. What I meant to ask was, "What do you want?" in an angry, commanding tone. What came out was a whimper. What? Regardless of whether or not humans can smell fear, they can certainly hear it. I heard it in my own voice, and that only made me more afraid. But he didn't react to it at all. He just stood there, smiling. And then, after what felt like forever, he turned around very slowly and started dance walking away. Just like that, not wanting to turn my back to him again, I just watched him go until he was far enough away to almost be out of sight. And then I realized something. He wasn't moving away anymore, nor was he dancing. I watched in horror as the distant shape of him grew larger and larger. He was coming back my way, and this time he was running. I ran too. I ran until I was off of the side road and back onto a better lit road with sparse traffic. Looking behind me then, he was nowhere to be found. The rest of the way home, I kept glancing over my shoulder, always expecting to see his stupid smile, but he was never there. I lived in that city for 6 months after that night, and I never went out for another walk. There was something about his face that always haunted me. He didn't look drunk. He didn't look high. He looked completely and utterly insane. And that's a very, very scary thing to see. Since the story was posted, there have been a few more reports of the smiling man. And here are a couple of those stories. The first encounter. This story is true if you believe it or not. The story starts. Last winter, I was going to get food when I noticed this man was following me. I turned around to confront him, and I asked him if I could help him. And all he did was tilt his head and smile at me. Then he proceeded to walk away. I continued to walk home. Then about halfway home, I hear someone sprinting at me. I turn around. I only see him running at me with nothing but a wide smile on his face. This was the day that his face was imprinted in my mind forever. I took off running home, closed the doors, and locked them. I looked out the window for me to see him across the street, sitting there, looking at me, smiling wide eyes. I called the police, and when they arrived, he was gone. The next few months, I noticed footprints around my yard and tapping on my window at night, and even seeing him at night in my backyard, smiling and staring at me, only for me to call the police. But every single time when they arrived, he was gone. Then, on the 4th of July, I was home alone, and I could hear the front door open. I looked downstairs to see him staring and smiling at the ceiling. I closed the door of my upstairs room and I locked it, and I called the police. But when they arrived, he was gone again. It's been months since I've heard from him or seen him, but last night I looked out my window only to see him staring again. Encounter number 2. It was halfway through lockdown in London, and I went on a walk at 8 p.m. with my dog. My dog was walking calmly until we rounded a corner where there was a man looking up at the sky in a tight-fitting suit. He was dancing down the street and was very lanky. He must have been around 6 foot 6 inches tall. I thought nothing of it until my dog started barking and whining. She started pulling away from the man. I kept walking on, though, and that was when I saw his giant smile, and his eyes were completely white. I immediately ran, knowing I was either dreaming or there was something else going on. Either way, I didn't want to take any chances. I ran as fast as I could, but he seemed to be unnaturally fast. I sprinted into a small alley and hid. My dog then also hid and became silent, as though it knew it was in danger and it could not fight its way out of. The man then walked into the alley and shouted into a grueling yet slightly childish in tone, "Wait, come back, I'm lost." As he walked past my hiding spot, the air suddenly dropped by what felt like at least 10 degrees Celsius. As soon as he had gone by, the air warmed up again. I sprinted back to my house and locked the doors and windows. While in my house, 1 hour later, I saw a shadow come outside my door and heard the same voice say, "I'm not done with you," and immediately hid out of view of the windows. I waited for 10 minutes and the shadow started to fade. As it went, I heard a creepy laughter, which slowly got quieter and quieter. I stayed hidden until the next morning, at which point the goosebumps after the event had still not gone. I decided to search up this man to see if anyone else knew about him, and I found a few videos and this Reddit group. Encounter number 3. Hi, my name is Zach. Obviously. I thought I'd share an encounter with a guy who fits the description on this page. I don't know if my smiling man is the same as the one on here, as I've seen many people claiming there's a supernatural element at play, and none of that happened to me. Anyway, here I go. It started under a streetlight. I was doing my usual early morning walk around my neighborhood with my dog Charlie. I left my home, locked my door, and started my walk. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, except for a feeling. For some reason, I can't explain, at least not yet, I had a chilling feeling. hairs on the back of my neck refusing to sit down. Charlie kept closer to me than usual. The whole time we walked, his ears perked up, alert. That's when I saw him. Under a streetlight, a man in a long trench coat, collar concealing his face under a fedora. He stood tall, must have been at least 6 feet. His hands were in his pockets. He unsettled me. Deep down, I knew something was wrong. As I walked past, he said hello to me. His voice raspy. Out of instinct, I said hello back. I think that was my mistake. Charlie was suspicious of the man, not taking his eyes off of him and growling as we walked past. I picked up the pace. I wanted to finish my walk and get home. We got further around the block when I heard, from behind, rhythmic tapping on the pavement. It got louder and louder, so I walked faster and faster. My walk takes me past a local police station. There's always someone at the reception desk with a clear view out of the door, and this night was no different. I stopped out the front and turned to face the rhythm. It was the man. He was dancing, following me by dancing. He stopped when I did not, looking at me, but down slightly. Charlie took a combative stance, growling and snarling at the man. It was then that I noticed something, a smile. Ear to ear, some teeth white, others yellow, unnatural. It was at this moment the officer at the reception desk opened the door, asking why I was standing outside. I told him this man had followed me, and the officer ushered me inside. He rushed me and Charlie in, and I quickly found out why. The man had looked up and stared directly at me. That toothy, unnatural smile, still ear to ear. Before I got inside, he asked in that raspy voice, "No smile for me?" The officer locked the doors behind us and radioed in to the other police in the area. We turned around to the man standing at the door, staring us down from the outside, Charlie barking viciously at him. I spent the night at that station, and in the morning gave a statement. The police found nothing on the guy. His face matched no records in the system. A few days passed, and the story broke in the local newspaper. A few people came forward with similar stories. I'm back at home now, and I don't think he's gone. Some nights I hear tapping on my windows. Charlie is almost always on edge now. But most concerning is almost every night I hear that God-forsaken tapping rhythm on the concrete outside. I think saying hello was a mistake. Encounter number 4. I know most posts start with, "I never believed in the supernatural before this." Bullshit. But I feel the need to point out that I didn't either. I'm a huge skeptic. I guess I know I'm wrong about the supernatural now. I'm from the Midwest, like most everyone who posts about this guy is. I'm not going to tell you where exactly, because I've got a thing about giving away my details on the internet. This is a throwaway account, by the way. If anybody I knew in real life heard this story, they'd all think I'm insane, in fact. I'm starting to think I am insane, myself. Anyway, before I let myself get more off track, the second thing I'll say is that no, I'm not from Iowa, but I'm not far from it either. I was convinced this guy was a made-up story, like Slender Man, until a couple of nights ago. It's taken me that long to wrap my head around the fact that he's real. So, I guess I should stop stalling and tell you my story. I have insomnia, and I hate being restless. The combination usually leads me to go for late night walks until I feel relaxed enough to at least go home and read, praying that I'll fall asleep. I think it was around 2:30 in the morning when I felt someone's presence behind me. At first, I brushed it off. I mean, I'm out at nearly 3 in the morning. Who isn't going to feel a bit of paranoia? I think I walked a block and a half without the feeling going away before I decided to risk a peek over my shoulder. He was standing. No, sorry. He was dancing underneath a street lamp about a half a block behind me. He didn't seem to be aware of me. Seem being the key word here, considering I felt his presence for a couple of blocks. Carrying on his strangely fluid dance with no one, head cocked up to the sky, and that fucking grin on his face. It was inhuman. The smile felt wrong. I thought if he could smile any more, it would tear the sides of his lips. He was around 6'4", wearing a shortish top hat and a suit looking like it needed a good trip to the dry cleaners. I stared stupidly with my jaw hanging open, wondering if this was a particularly vivid, sleep-deprived hallucination when I tripped over a crack on the sidewalk and fell on my ass. I guess I'd been walking backwards, an unconscious attempt to get away from him. I remember letting out a yelp when I connected with the concrete. And that's when his head whipped around, inhuman smile and all, and locked eyes with me. It was the single most terrifying moment of my life. There was nothing sane, nothing human, nothing remotely logical in those eyes. It was terror, insanity, and everything wrong with the world. The next thing I knew, I was sprinting down the street. Wide awake as fuck all now. I've slept about an hour total since that night. Everything I remembered from the stories I've read about him went flying out the window. I felt dread, terror, and intense fear I didn't know possible. I must have ran a couple of blocks, attempting to loop back to my house before I risked another glance over my shoulder. He was right fucking there. 20 feet behind me, maybe? He didn't look exerted in the least. Still doing his fucking dance run thing with those abnormally long fucking legs. Meanwhile, I'm not sure if I'll be able to draw in my next breath or not, and I was only barely able to keep running. In a moment of sheer stupidity, I actually ran past my house. My fear too intense to stop. I'd rather not be caught or whatever by this guy. I don't know if my hands would have been able to stop shaking enough to get the key in the lock quick enough anyway. In another moment of stupidity, I turned sharply into the neighbor's driveway and sprinted into their backyard, ducking into the darkest part of it. My eyes were clenched shut. I had my arms wrapped around my knees, and I tried to basically stop breathing, even though I knew it wasn't going to do me any good. I heard rocks skidding along the driveway, and then they stopped. I felt those eyes on me again. It felt like an eternity before I was able to open them, and there he was, standing not 7 feet in front of me, dancing, staring, smiling, fucking smiling. I'm never going to be able to burn that look out of my mind, no matter how many shots of whiskey I take. When I die, it'll probably be the last thing I think of. Fucking great. For a moment, I thought he wasn't going to do anything, and I'd be able to get up and sprint out of the place without worrying about him coming after me. But then he started dance walking closer and closer until he knelt down in front of me. We were nearly nose to nose. Out of all the things I could have been thinking at that moment, the thing I focused on was the fact that his breath was cold, ice cold. I shudder thinking about it. We were posed like that, me with my arms wrapped tightly around my knees, and him just kneeling and breathing and smiling for what felt like another eternity. I was about to let out a scream that surely would have woken up the entire neighborhood, and I'm not too sure what good that would have done. But he stood up, immediately picking up his dance where he left off, and danced right down the fucking driveway and left. It took me 20 minutes before I was able to stand up and walk back to my house. I puked in the bushes out front before I managed to unlock the door. And like I said before, I still haven't slept. Every time I look out the window, I expect to see his face there, pressed up against the glass with his ear-to-ear grin. I don't go for walks anymore either. I've started working out when I can't sleep. I'm not sure I'll ever leave my house at dark again. I also found a few tips to help avoid the smiling man. Number 1, never go out alone at night, especially if you live in a small town. 2, if you happen to come across him, do not make a noise. It will interrupt him from his dancing, and he will sense you and begin to stalk you. Try your best not to be seen. 3, if you do make a noise, he will eventually sense you. Run. Run to your house or to the nearest safe place. It seems that when your back is turned, he gets faster. And number 4, once you get to shelter, lock everything. Keep an eye out for him until he leaves. Until then, I would not recommend going outside until the sun comes up. All of these stories have a few things in common. The cartoonish smile, the dancing movement, the speed. Will we ever know who this man is or what exactly he wants? Have you ever experienced the smiling man? Let me know. That brings me to the end of this episode. Thanks for listening to the D.E.A.D podcast. Please follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at the D.E.A.D podcast. Also, feel free to send in your stories, episode suggestions, or feedback at the deadpodcast1@gmail.com or send me a DM on Instagram. If you enjoyed this show, please rate and review the podcast on whatever platform you are listening on, and be sure to come back next week for my next episode.